Okay, so I'm going to kind of leave this out of presentation mode because I'm going to be jumping between some code samples and just some basic title slides. The talk today is about common actions, filters, WordPress hooks in general. We're going to go over some very specific ones as well as the big picture view of what they are, how they work, and how they differ and are similar from each other. Let me just find out how my screens are mirrored so I can go back and forth. There we go. So the primary benefit of working with hooks, if it's something that you're new to getting into, is that it allows you to do a lot of things with a small amount of code. So whereas something might require you to go in and edit a file and a whole bunch of code, you could just run a small little piece that will override what's currently there and let you do more work with less effort. There's also a compatibility bonus that when you go in and you hard code edit certain things that you don't want to be a certain way, or you hard code edit them to be a certain way, that might affect how other people expect WordPress to run, and you get into the area which will come up again and again, is that you don't want to be editing core WordPress files or even core theme files that will eventually be overridden on an update. So hooks also allow you to add your code into WordPress and feel pretty safe that other changes, updates that will happen are not going to affect your code, and everything will still run as expected. So you also have a benefit of anybody else who's writing a plugin usually will add hooks that you could tie into their plugin code as well. So when you work with hooks, actions, and filters, you're not just talking about being able to edit what WordPress does natively, but also what other plugins are doing, or like I said, what other themes are doing. And for me in particular, why it came up as a question, she mentioned in the intro, I teach at an online school called Treehouse, and we're at the great point now where we have like 20-some courses, but it's starting to get more into the need for heavier content in the like true developer, get in under the hood and really begin to explore that. So this has been in preparation of trying to do a course on the same topic and trying to figure out, what do we need to explain? What are some common ones that are in there? So that's how I've come to it. And when we get to questions and answers, it's very easy to come up with a simple question with this, like how do hooks work? Or I'm still not getting this general picture. And then it's going to be really easy if you know development to be like, okay, well, why doesn't publish post work this way, and what's up with transitions and this and that, and you're going to stump me real fast. So it's a wide topic for me as well, because you know some stuff that you work with commonly, but it's real easy to start finding cool fringe things, and I know in the time preparing for this, it really opened my eyes of like, oh, you can do that? Oh, you can't do that. And the hooks perspective of looking at WordPress opens up a lot in that area. So that's kind of why we're looking at it. In terms of breaking down the actual definition, let me see if I could present this and still see mine at the same time. Nice. Very simply, how many of you in here are developers that already work with hooks or are at the point where you feel like you need to start doing so? And how many of you have no interest in working with actually coding hooks? Okay, only one or two people. Great. Okay. These are very generic terms, and since it seems like everybody's pretty much on board, I'm going to kind of gloss over and just move on and not get too deep into definitions. But hooks come in two varieties in WordPress, and these are important to understand the difference. And when we get into the actual code examples, it'll become more clear. But filters are going to be the hooks that let you get something, change it, and then throw it back to WordPress all before the page loads or all before something hits the database. So these are going to have to do with manipulations, changing something, maybe removing something, editing it slightly, and then giving it back to WordPress. So these functions, or when you're working with filters, you're always going to be returning something. Whereas actions are more about doing something. So you're going to get a little window in, right? For example, when a post is about to publish or the page is about to load or WordPress is building the admin area menus, you're going to have a chance to throw out something or do something at that point. So when you're getting into working with these, hooks is going to be the generic term that covers everything, filters is going to be one type, and actions is going to be another. And they work differently, and some of the stuff that goes along with them is a little bit different. So it's important to know that. And early on, when you're looking up a hook, one of the first things you want to do is figure out, am I dealing with an action or am I dealing with a filter? Because I'm going to interact with them differently depending on that. This is a huge array of about 200 some, well, it's an associative array with about 210, 208 something elements in it. And this will give you all of the hooks in WordPress. So what we could do with something like this is, if I go back to my screen here, excuse me. Let me get the code set up, then this is going to flow back and forth a lot faster. It's not letting me bring the code over. All right, sorry, we'll go back to mirroring here. So what I have here is a very basic theme set up, and it's basically just set up to include a bunch of examples that we're going to be going through, and it's functions and an index. So in some cases, when we look at hooks, we might need to throw something out into a template. In some cases, we might need to work in the functions.php file. If you're in a plugin, then your code's going to be executed from there. But for these examples, we'll just be working inside of a functions.php file and playing with our hooks there. So the first one that I want to show you is a very simple file. I'll get to this in a moment. But very simply, this WP filter, if you are new to getting into hooks, take the time to just output this and then go check it out. Look at all these things that are happening. Now, if this is something you're going to be doing, there are some tools that make doing this a little bit nicer. So the reason I had this coded out is because there is a plethora, there are a lot of code snippets that you can find online that will help you debug or sort through actions and filters. And one of them is a little library called Debug Hooks. And in it, it has a function called list hooks. And it's going to take this same thing and just make it a little bit nicer to look at. So same data, it's just going through and cleaning it up. So let's take a moment to look at this with maybe something that might be common or make sense. So WP title is one of the hooks that we have available, and we don't know by looking at this whether it's a filter or whether it's an action, but we do know that there are things that are attached into it. So these are going to be all of the things that are hooked into this hook currently. Let's say we output that out. We have it, we have access now to this array, and we know how to find out what's there. What's the next step for digging deeper to learn more about these? And there's two approaches that we could take. We could simply take whatever hook it is and throw it into Google, and something's going to pop up for it, which is important to do, and there are reasons that you're going to need to search and find this. But then you could also get into the source code, and you could trace it back there and figure out what's going on. So I want to show you real quick an example here of if we come back into this, and rather than, we're just going to export everything out again. And I'm going to use the example again, WP title, for a reason. So let's say that we, for some reason, wanted to get in with our plugin and start customizing how titles are displayed on the page. And if you don't know, well, this will make sense in a second. Let me Google search it and then explain. So when I search for this, two things come up at the top, and this is really important. We have a function reference link, and we have a filter reference link. And the reason this happens is because WP title is a function. We could call it in our index.php file, or it wouldn't be in our index, it would be in our header. Right? We could do something like this, and you've probably seen that used in a theme before. So we could use it as a function, but it also has a filter attached to it that lets us customize what's going on here. And it's a filter because it's going to give us that data. We could pull it out, manipulate it, do what we want, and then send that data back. We're not going to necessarily send an email or a tweet anytime somebody writes out the WP title, so we're not going to run an action based off of it. It's going to be a filter. So this is important when you're looking around. Make sure that when you go to the codex, you're distinguishing looking up just what the function is and how to call that in your code, versus when you're looking up a filter reference and how that's going to behave differently. So when you do pull that up with WP title, something that you'll notice is you'll have what the hook is, what function you're tying in, the priority, and then a final parameter of, is that not listed there? Of how many variables, how many parameters your function is going to accept. Let me pull up a code example here to make it a little bit clearer. Oh, sorry, I'll come to the code example in a second. Let me show you how to search the code base. So I have here another install of WordPress opened up. And what I normally do in this case, just because of the tool I'm using, other tools are a lot easier to do this in, but I'm going to do a search through, and you can't see the full thing here, but I'm going to search through this entire WordPress install. So I could search for two things here. I could either search for any time somebody's adding something to this filter, meaning I could do that. And what this is going to give me, as I said, was anytime somebody else's code is tying into it. So that's one thing I could track down by searching the source. And if we looked at this, a lot of these would be inside of themes, different themes that it's finding, 2013, 2012. They're all doing their own little customization of what WP title is. Then we could do a different type of search, and we could search for apply filters. And what apply filters is going to do is show us where in the WordPress core this is actually being called. So if we look under, and the reason I'm searching it this way is I'm not closing the rest of it because I'm not necessarily sure what's going to come after. And if you're inside of somebody else's plugin, they may or not have a space here, so when you are searching, that may make a difference. But thanks to the standard practices, this will work in core. We can see that it's going to be right here, that this is where every single thing that is attached to that hook is going to now run. So when we see apply filters, that's going to find everything that we said was listed out and hooked into this, and then it's going to execute at that point. So there's going to be times when you're trying to figure out what hook should I use? Is this really it? When is this happening? And these are the ways to trace it back within the source code. So you could either look and see where everybody else is hooking in, how they're doing it, or you could see where is it actually running. And this is the same thing for working with actions and filters. They're both possible to track down this way. Okay, so when we're working with native hooks, one of the simplest things is going to be go in and remove something that's native from happening. So you want to stop it from happening. And let me show you a quick example of what that would look like. Remove filter, okay. So what we have here is very simple. We'd say remove filter, whatever the filter is that we want to attach to, and then whatever it is that we want to remove. So in our source code when we were, or not in our source code, but in the theme when I was echoing out everything that's inside of that array, and we get to WP title, we find, okay, one of the things that's hooked here is WP texturize. And if we wanted to, we could say, okay, I no longer want that there. And if I were to add this into my functions.php now, and I refreshed this, that should be gone. Anybody see that error? Okay, we're going to chalk it up and just say it's going to work. We could do that. So this would be how you would remove something that's already there. You could also, for example, if all you wanted to do is have something run later, you can't just hack in and change the priority, so you would have to remove it and then add it right back, but just change where you wanted to place it. Because by default, it's going to be at 10. We just want to move something to happen later. For example, if you're like, I really need my code to come here and this other stuff to be moved around, that would be how you could do that. So removing something is going to be a very simple application of working with hooks. There are also a couple hook helper functions that if you are working especially with somebody else's, so let me find my notes for which file this is. How's filter? So if you're working with somebody else's plugin and your theme needs to change how that plugin is functioning, but you don't know whether that plugin is going to be installed, then you would need to make sure that you're checking to make sure, hey, does this filter actually exist before you go and run your code on it? So this would be an example. Let's say that somebody was taking all your content and throwing something down at the bottom, and you wanted to change how that was working, but you wanted to make sure, hey, I need to make sure that they're actually using this plugin first. Then you could run this conditional statement using has filter, make sure that it's there, and then go ahead and execute your code. Has filter, has action will work the same. There's one more, which is current filter, and this could be helpful if you're using the same function in multiple filters. So let's say that you have this custom way of sanitizing your data, and you know you're going to use it here, 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 and here. But it's going to behave slightly different there in different cases, or maybe it's going to behave slightly different just in one case. So you could use current filter within it and say, okay, if I'm in init now, then run it this way. But if I'm in this place, then go ahead and run it a little bit differently. So these conditional pieces, these kind of helper functions will help you write a little bit cleaner, more efficient, and make sure that you aren't breaking things as you're running them. The real heart of where it gets going, though, is when you start working with your own custom functions. And this is when you're going to take your code and you're going to hook it into WordPress. So right now, we've just been removing or playing around with stuff that's already there. But if you have your own custom code and you want to add it in, that's probably the largest use case of when you're going to be working with hooks. So let's look at WP title now. And this is actually from a really great article from Tom McFarlane on how to properly work with WP title. And this is just a short excerpt from some of the code that he was working with. So the first thing that we have to mention is that we're running add filter. We're going to say what filter we're applying to, in this case WP title again. our own custom function that we want, what priority we want it set at, and then how many parameters we're going to accept. This is kind of weird because most of these hooks only take one. WP title is one that takes two, and the reason is because you have the separator parameter as well as what the actual title is. But what we're doing here is some cool stuff where, you know, if you've worked with WP title and you echo it out on the home page, it usually won't do anything. So the title tag would come out blank. You can see there's nothing going on up top here. But if we could take this code and link it in WP title, we could see that now it's putting out more information on the home page. So it's no longer behaving in the default way that WP title would. And to pull up the code again and just walk through it again, it's going to get your blog name, it's going to add to it, it's going to get the site description, and depending on where it is, it will go ahead and add that in. A slightly more complex example. So this is a case where you're not getting something, changing it, and then giving it back. You're running your own action based on when something is happening. So this would be an example of, let's say that you hit publish, and you want to send out a tweet based off whenever that happens. So there is a hook that lets you tie in and add code as soon as somebody clicks publish. Now that actual code and this is more complex because there are different states in WordPress. You could be adding a new one, you could be updating an old one, and different other possibilities, as well as if you were sending a tweet, you wouldn't just hack down the content or the excerpt. You'd probably want your own custom field there, right, where they could say, this is going to be my tweet, so you'd actually be pulling in that custom field and then sending that out to Twitter. But to emphasize the hook area, this publish post would be what you would tie into to get your code to run at that point. And again, you could run your own custom code tying into WordPresses. Let me mention one other one here that's important is if you're writing code and you want other people to be able to hook into yours, what does that look like? So for example, if you're a plugin or theme developer and you want your theme or plugin to be more extensible, it's a good idea to add in your own hooks, and they're going to work very much the same way as the native WordPress ones, where people will then be able to tie into your code and execute their own stuff on it. So there's two parts that are running here, and it comes back to something I mentioned earlier. You have an add filter, and you have apply filters. I'm just going to simplify this. Okay, so these two pieces of code, this would be an example of someone running based off of your new filter. And then this would be the code that you would add when you want that filter to run. So somewhere along the line you'd say, okay, I have a value here that I want people to be able to pull out, modify, and send back to me. So you would call apply filters here. And then anytime you wanted to create and add your own new one, you would do it in this format of call whatever it is and then add your code to it. The nice thing about this is you don't have to register a new hook. All you have to do is just add this area into your code, and if there's stuff there, it'll run. And if there isn't, then it won't. And if you want to tap into it, you don't have to say register a new hook or do anything more than just identify what it is. So that's a nice simple process there. Okay, so I was a little bit off. I thought I'd be going for 45 minutes instead of 30. So now the whole section on common hooks, popular hooks, and third-party hooks is now going to kind of be question time. So what we could do is I could answer any questions you have about general questions and stuff that I've kind of covered here. And then if you also want, I could get into talking about or just pulling up some quick examples of common ones that are popularly done. And at some point I do want to just mention, like Gravity Forms, for example, has some great hooks that you could tie into as well. But since we are at the tea time, I'll pause now for questions, and then if it dies down, I could mention some more examples.
I'm mostly a content person, and there may be some other people that are developers that just kind of want to know the theory behind it, a little bit about it. But is there a good resource for just finding hooks that you can paste directly into pages and posts, and that explains their functionality, or should we just go to the codex?
Well, there are some general good resources, and there are plenty of tutorials and explanations for non-developers of like understanding hooks better, just understanding what they do. If you're not coding, I don't know of a place where you would ever use one. Like, you can't just throw them into your edit page or use it as you would a short code, for example. You'd actually need to be up in that code. Yeah. Correct? Right? Yeah. If you're calling hooks from your edit post visual editor, I think there's probably a better approach. Yeah.
Hey, thank you for the time. I have a quick question. As a front-end developer, let's say I make a blog site where I have 10 contributors, and each of them have varying skill in computers. Maybe some will write their, let's say, a blog post in all capitals for their title. Some will kind of do capitals, non-capitals, etc. Let's just say, as a maintainer, I would like them to have where they put in a title, it would be all capitals. I don't want to do that through CSS. I want to do that through an action hook. Can you provide an example where I would apply the function to the title, and then, okay.
I'm with you. Okay, so the question was dealing with how do you standardize some way of formatting what the title is. Now, you could do this with CSS to some extent, but if you really wanted to hard code edit how that's coming.
This is kind of like a broad example.
What you have here is a hook for the same function you do, the title. So you can tie into that, and this is actually what I was looking for. Like they're already along the lines. But what you would do is you'd write out your own function that would format the string however you want, and you'd simply hook it into the title, and then that will take care of it.
Thank you.
Now, if that's actually saving it to the database properly, actually what you may need to do is grab that title when it's published, change it, and then make sure that it's inserted correctly. But there's a filter simply to reformat the title and spit it back out without resaving that.
I've got to do an add action to actually apply.
This filter will add it out and do everything. It just won't save it back into the database necessarily. So it may be an order of where you wanted to get that when they first saved it versus just any time you see it popping out, make sure that it's displayed correctly.
Thank you.
There's a question down here.
Hi there. I was wondering, is there a way to print out all of the hooks from a plugin that you are using in the same way that you can print out the core hooks?
Yeah, they'll actually, if you add your own custom hook, it'll come out here. So now a way to distinguish, that's a really good, okay, you stumped me. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm guessing yes, but they'll also all output here if you added your own. Anybody in the audience know a way to identify just a single plugin's hooks and echo those out? If they're a really good plugin, you do it this way by going to their documentation. Or if it's something like WooCommerce, this is another good one. These are my two kind of third-party examples of people that do a really good job. These guys less so, because all they do is tell you what it is and tell you where you can find it, versus a little bit more documentation with Gravity Forms and how to tie into their stuff. I think we have an answer coming.
Yeah, just a last question. There's a plugin called Query Monitor,
yeah.
and it won't do exactly what you're wanting, but it will make it a little bit easier. You can look at all the hooks that are being used for a particular plugin, and it'll break it down to a format that's a little bit easier to read.
The co-author of this talk, ladies and gentlemen, Cole. Other questions? One over here.
When you are removing the filter, your example, changing the priority, when you add the filter back, you have to worry about the parameter, the number of parameter, that 1 or 2 at the end. Do you need to first query before you remove it, or does it matter?
No, to remove it, all you have to do is identify it and yank it out. But if you're going to be receiving data from it and creating your own custom function, you need to make sure that your parameters match however many they're passing in.
So is there a way to dynamically just query how many parameters that filter was going to take?
That's the step of jumping into either the codex and looking real quick, or in the source code, you would just identify it by finding what it is and where.
Exactly, yeah, 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Any other questions? Or I could show you a few code examples. All right, I'm going to show you the really not sexy stuff. So at Treehouse, I do a lot of courses, and what I did when I was preparing this was I was like, what are the ones that every time we have to use again and again? And they had to do with registering menus, linking JavaScript and CSS, and widgets. So these pretty much get used pretty regularly. Register menu, WP and Q scripts. So when you register a menu, you're tapping into init. And init is one of the most basic hooks that's going to run anytime, whether you're on the front end or on the back end. And what we're doing in this case is just tying in our register menus to make sure when WordPress is first loading, it knows that we have those menus there. WP and Q scripts. Now, what I've done here is you could see WP and Q scripts is the same action here as the same action here. And what this does is tie into WP head at the very top of your header right before you close your head tag, and it's where your CSS is outputted and linked. I like to link them separately, so I have one function where I enqueue all my CSS, and then one where I enqueue my JavaScript, and do those two separately. Some themes will add those two together, but this one, it's hard to build a theme without CSS or JavaScript, so chances are you'll be using those at some point to link into it. Widgets init is another one, and this is a little bit higher level. We saw the hook just init, and the widgets are initialized, and then you could tie in your own sidebar. So if we just ran this without tying it in, it wouldn't necessarily run at the right time. But those were the most common ones that I saw again and again. There are some popular kind of cool ones. Let's see, because we're kind of short on time. You could see this list. Anyone in particular you'd like me to pull up?
Admin menu page.
Admin menu page. Good choice. Okay, so what we're dealing with here is the add action of admin menu. So this is going to happen whenever that menu on the admin side is being kicked out. And by the way, there's also one for the front end for the top menu that comes up. So if you wanted to add your own links in there, very similar process. What we're going to do here is register my menu. Wait, why are we calling two things? I'm sorry, we're going to add these are doing two different, that's why. So you have the ability to add a You have the option to add a link down in here, or you could add your own whole section. So this code here, add, if we just toss this in our functions, we could see that we'll have a settings page pop up with a link down here, which is the simplest approach, or we could add in our own whole custom menu level. So those are the two things going on inside of this. And the cool thing that I didn't know about before was that when you use add menu page, which is not necessarily a hook, but we're using it to create the page, that there are a whole set of dash icons, and you could use those by default for what you appear with your menu and their text icons, which is really great. So when that link was created up here for custom menu, you could see that there's a little globe there, and that was taken just from pulling up whatever the appropriate tag was or code was for this. So this will be going out with all the other slide decks, and I'll have a nice little repository. I have about 30 or 40 different ones we didn't get to, but I'll include them in there, so it could just be a helpful resource as you go on. And I encourage you to take that step and get into working with hooks, and hopefully if you're kind of on the edge, either this was helpful in that regard, or is overwhelming and you're going to wait till next WordCamp before you think about approaching it. But either way, thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions, and that guy Cole in the back is another great one. Thank you.